Okay, welcome everyone to our master plan session. This is our fifth in a series on the industrial development discussion. If you'll all stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. I'd like to thank you all for joining. I'm going to turn the program over to Joe here from Giffords Webster. So you can watch the screen.
Good evening, everybody. Yeah, so the focus of this evening's discussion is industrial development. So I guess one of the key questions here is, why should the township be pursuing industrial development? So it's a key component of economic development for a community. It provides employment opportunities, of course. It draws in daytime population that supports local businesses. It provides a really solid tax base. It's one of the few uses where the receipts exceed the expenses, generally speaking. It supports local utilities through tap fees and user fees. And Macomb County has a very strong push on economic development through industrial development. So it dovetails with regional and county economic development initiatives. Just wanted to give a little bit of background on the township and where it's been and where it's headed. So we're growing faster than most of our surrounding communities. Oakland Township is the only surrounding community that's growing faster, but they're starting with a much smaller population. So, you know, to go up 10% when you've got 12 people versus to go up 10% when you have 100 people is obviously a smaller bar to clear. So we are adding the most raw people. We're at 26,200 something right now, up about 12.7% from 2010. During the last decade, we've averaged about 367 people moving to the township. That doesn't account for people being born to families already living in the township. So we're adding a little more than 400 people a year, basically. SEMCOG forecasts that we're going to be at 36,000 by 2030. That's over the next 8 years. That's a lot of people. You know, we're already past the 26,000 because that was from 2 years ago. That's the 2020 number. But still, that's a lot of people coming in. Of the current population, about 12,000 are in the workforce. Of course, some of them are children. Some people are retired. So there's always kind of like a chunk in the middle that's eligible for the workforce, and only a portion of them will be in the workforce. We have a median household income here of $93,883. That was up 3.2% from 2010, and that's in inflation-adjusted dollars as an actual increase. When we look at our population, we're a fairly educated township relative to Michigan as a whole. Almost half of everybody who lives in the township, 25 and over, has at least an associate's degree. And we do have about 15.5 people with graduate degrees. Percent of the population has graduate degrees. And 83% of Washington Township workers drive to work alone. And we're going to get into a little bit more about that later. So when we look at the top trades that people who live in Washington Township work in, we see professional and technical services and corporate HQs as the top category. These are all Bureau of Labor Statistics categories. Some of them are a little weird, like administrative support and waste services. I'm not sure why waste services was combined with those other two categories, but nevertheless, that's the category that BLS uses. So retail trade, that administrative support category that I was just talking about, information and financial activities, leisure and hospitality, and then we get down to natural resources, mining and construction, which is the first kind of industrial category we see, and then healthcare. And healthcare is forecasted by SEMCOG to grow the most by 2045. It's a massive growth industry right now. when we look at who comes to the township to work, so 29.2% of workers in the township actually live in the township. We have kind of a large domestic workforce. But where the other ones are coming from, the top 5 sources of workers for the township are Shelby Township, it's 11.9%, Bruce Township, out of the SEMCOG region, so most of those are going to be coming from Lapeer County, down M53. Probably all the way up to Imlay. And then you've got Macomb Township and Warren, and then there's a bunch of other communities that contribute less than 4%. We have about 4,200 workers that commute to Washington daily from other municipalities. And there's about, like 5,300 jobs in the township. Now, 10,000 of our residents leave the township daily for work. So 14.5% of Washington Township workers work in the township. And then their top employment destinations for Washington residents are Shelby, Warren, Sterling Heights, Troy, and Auburn Hills. And one thing you'll probably notice about all those places is that they all have a lot of industrial and they all have a lot of office development. When we look at the market for industrial development, Southeast Michigan actually has a really healthy industrial development market right now. So 4 of Michigan's 11 major industry sectors have surpassed the pre-pandemic job totals at this point. And 3 of those sectors are industrial focused. That's trade, transportation, and utilities, construction, and mining and logging. We start to look at actual industrial property. New leasing in Michigan, just through the first half of this year, totaled 4.7 million square feet, amounting to a 137.9% increase year over year. That's one of the largest mid-year new leasing totals ever. So there's a lot of growth right now in that sector. Demand was concentrated in the warehouse and distribution sector, which is probably not going to be too surprising to most people. There is just a lot of growth in that with all the shipping and remote shopping that people are doing now. And Macomb North and Macomb South, which are kind of considered separate regions for the purposes of these statistics, actually accounted for over half of the new leasing. So they dominated the leasing landscape. It's kind of amazing how much of that was concentrated just in this county. There were 3 lease transactions, over 100,000 square feet. Ashley's Furniture, Faurecia Automotive, and Shallow Group all did some very large facilities. In fact, Orion Township just approved a massive new electric truck plant over there. So there's a lot of that going on at the moment too. The auto industry is kind of retooling for an electric future right now, and there's a lot of redevelopment of existing facilities for that, and there's also a lot of new facilities coming online. We have increases in net rental rates by square foot, and that extends into the warehouse and distribution space as well. We're just seeing higher rents, higher prices per square foot, just because there is kind of a crunch for industrial property. This graphic on the side is really hard to read up here, but I couldn't find a larger one, so I'll give you some of the numbers that are in it. But generally speaking, industrial property vacancy rates are really low across Southeast Michigan. They generally hover around 4%. On this map, you can see that over in the I-96 corridor, the west corridor, like Plymouth South Lyon area, and then the south corridor are all just over 4%. And when you get over our way to northern Oakland County, Lake Orion, Auburn Hills, Rochester Hills area, and then the east corridor, which would be M53 and 94, you see vacancy rates that are less than 4%. So there's a lot of people looking for property right now, a lot of properties occupied, very little available to move into. Just a little bit about Macomb County's top industries, automotive, which is probably not going to be a surprise to anyone. We have a lot of major automotive facilities here. One just on the edge of the township up in Romeo. We have 56,519 automotive-related jobs in Macomb County, and that grew almost 10% between 2010 and 2020. So, you know, I know we're used to the narrative of declining jobs in manufacturing, but here that's actually not the case. Average earnings are around $90,000. That's compared to the national average of $71,000. And there's just a lot of demand for this right now. A couple other top industries, defense. There are 25,000 jobs in the defense industry here. It's experiencing very significant growth. I guess from a global perspective, that's kind of the last industry you want to experience growth, because that means there's like lots of war and stuff, but it does benefit this area. Demand for software engineers is actually driving a lot of that growth, though, because a lot of the defense industry has changed. It's high technology now. Whereas once it was more of a blunt force thing, there's a lot of people who do their jobs in the defense industry sitting at a computer now, whereas that wasn't really the case 20, 25 years ago. And the earnings there are very, very high, $135,000. Healthcare, another top industry. We got 41,677 jobs in the county. That's as of 2020. That's up about 11% from 2010. We've had a lot of major healthcare facilities open in Macomb County recently, particularly in the middle band of townships as population has continued to move north in the county. Average earnings there are just below 61,000, or 60,000 rather. Nationally, they're just above 60,000, so we're a little below the average there. And Macomb County has 3 general hospitals now. That's a pretty big increase from just where it was, 20 years ago. And then food and agriculture is the fourth largest, or the fourth, rounding out the top industries in Macomb County. About a quarter of all the land in Macomb County is used for agricultural purposes. You've got a few townships like Richmond, Armada, and Ray in particular that are mostly agriculture, and Lenox and Bruce and Washington still have a lot of agriculture as well. Even Chesterfield still has quite a bit in the northern and western portions of the township. There's 400 active farms, and one thing that's interesting about that is that 96% of those are family owned, which if you back out and look at agriculture nationally, that's not so much the case. If you go to places like Iowa and Nebraska, there's a lot more corporate farming done there. Michigan's agriculture industry is still very family farm focused. So it's kind of unique that way. We have a lot of food processing and manufacturing related jobs in the county. Earnings are lower than those other sectors that we were just looking at, a little under 50,000. But we are a major center of agriculture, even by statewide standards. We're ranked in the top 5% of all counties nationwide in dollar amount of products sold for nursery, greenhouse, floriculture, and sod products in 2017. And this is a concept that we're going to talk a little bit about. I have a little video link at the beginning of the presentation, if we want to bring it up, from the county about this concept of Industry 4.0. Thinkers in this space are calling this the fourth industrial revolution. I guess the first was when we first invented tools that kind of take it way back to the beginning of humanity. Basically, the fourth industrial revolution that these industry groups are talking about is heavily centered on automation of traditional manufacturing and industrial practices, using a lot of modern technology, AI, and other smart technology, a lot of machine-to-machine communication, lots of wireless communication. Internet of Things is something that I'm sure you've all heard about. Just integration and automation are just kind of the watchwords in manufacturing and heavy industry now. They're considered to be 9 major pillars of this Industry 4.0, kind of the future of industrial development. Cybersecurity is one of them. I don't know if a week goes by when you don't hear about some major cybersecurity problem where a bunch of passwords get hacked or somebody's information is in the wrong hands. So that's clearly a big part of our future, is managing our security online. Virtual and augmented reality is another big sector that's just exploded in growth in the last 10 years. Big data and analytics. It's an older field than I think a lot of people realize, but nevertheless, it's also experiencing explosive growth. Advanced robotics and automation, additive manufacturing, that's 3D printing is the main thing that we think about with additive manufacturing. System integration, advanced simulation, cloud computing, and that back to that Internet of Things that I mentioned earlier. So this is kind of where things are going. There is still a certain amount of traditional machine shop type industrial out there, but it's becoming a smaller and smaller percentage of the overall industrial sector. So in our 2005 master plan, we had some industrial development goals. So it starts out with this phrase, we envision a larger, well-planned industrial development area in the township. Such an area must be able to accommodate the basic needs of industry, such as regional and major thoroughfare access, utility availability, and strong workforce demographic indicators. Now, I still agree with that regional and major thoroughfare access portion of it. However, when we look at that list of things that was on the last slide, one thing you'll notice is that a lot of those things are not uses that require a bunch of heavy trucking. So one thing that we might be thinking about in the future is whether or not we bifurcate our industrial zoning to accommodate both that traditional hauling things, warehousing, that kind of industrial development, but also the high technology stuff that can possibly be a little further off the beaten track because it doesn't require those large vehicles going to and from all day. Attractive industrial areas that add value to the community without reducing the quality of life for township residents. I think in our past discussions at these sessions, we've heard things to this effect where people talk a lot about screening and wanting to ensure that when you have a transition from one use to another, that the transition is soft, and that if there's something potentially objectionable happening on the other side of that screen, the people who are living closest to it are not experiencing it. And then industrial development situated in park-like settings which afford a more palatable transition with adjoining uses. So basically talking about kind of industrial park style development. Now here is the future land use map from 2005. In the purple, you can see there's a little piece down here, but for the most part, it's kind of almost like a river running through the middle of the township along M53. That's all planned for industrial. And then in 2018, this little area that's outlined in pink was identified in an addendum to the master plan that singled out this area for, it was kind of a recreational development, future land use. However, in the text that describes that area, it also talks about the potential for industrial development there. And there's been some work done with utilities in that area that would enable that area to support industrial development. So one of the things that we should be considering when we're thinking about our future land use map this time is whether or not that area should have more of an emphasis on industrial or perhaps technology development and other economic development supporting uses rather than the recreation-focused designation that it has now. This is our current zoning. So this map shows currently industrially zoned areas. There are 566 total acres that are zoned industrial. Over 500 of those are actually vacant still. So we have a lot of land that's available for these industrial uses. It stands to reason that a lot of that land is going to be swallowed up over the next 10 to 20 years. So when we think about what we plan for industrial development, we can keep those goals that I read in mind, but also the demand and how we plan beyond what we already have designated for industrial development on our map. The kind of reddish, like crosshatch up there is all the vacant industrial land. So you can see little purple patches scattered through it. Those are areas that have development on them. Not all of it is necessarily industrial at the moment. Some of these are legacy parcels that have been zoned industrial since they were originally developed. Utilities, we used these same maps last time, but basically just wanted to point out that the areas that we have zoned for industrial right now are broadly well supported by utilities. This stretch of Van Dyke was just approved for utility extensions right here, so that will close one of the gaps in the industrial area within the next couple of years. And then we've got some work going on over here as well, and up along 30 Mile. Sorry, that was 32 Mile here, 30 miles there. And that will also support future industrial development. Another thing to think about is transportation. We talked about it a little bit earlier with those goals where we talked about proximity to major thoroughfares and major regional roads. Industrial development does affect the transportation network of a community. We don't have any direct control over the maintenance or improvement of the road network in the township. So we want to look at routing to ensure that we keep wear and tear to a minimum. Keeping paths from M53 to industrial facilities as short and direct as possible should be one of our goals. Partly because you want to ensure that you're keeping down the wear and tear on your roads, but also because if you don't keep those routes short and direct, the chances that those trucks are going to be going past where people live increase. We also do have a lack of public transit, which could potentially pose problems for some industrial employees as the number of facilities and jobs increases. People do need to be able to get to work. Most people do own vehicles, but not everyone in the region does. That's just a little note about where we're headed next. So discussion points for this evening, and I think this is going to be relative to our other sessions. This will probably be a fairly short discussion, but nevertheless, discussion points for tonight. We should consider this Industry 4.0 concept and how that affects how we plan for the future. Do we need more than one designation on our map? Do we need to consider the high technology that doesn't necessarily require the heavy truck traffic separately from the other industrial development that we've considered? Are there places that could go where it would not be objectionable, whereas traditional industrial would be? I guess I'd be interested in it. If anybody's got any thoughts on that, you can chime in. But
in regards to the industrial, we used to have two designations, a light industrial and then a heavy industrial.
Sure.
And it separated that, from like how you're explaining, and then we merged it all into one industrial.
Sure.
So that was something that transpired a few years back.
Sure. Yeah, and it may be it may be valid to think about splitting it back up, but probably not the same way it was split, because once upon a time, it was split very differently than what we might be thinking about now. You know, the high tech was probably not considered as much in the ordinance, whereas now we really have to be thinking about it and how we accommodate it, because a lot of our future development probably is going to be in that sector, that and warehousing. Those are the two things that are probably the biggest things we need to be considering. And warehousing, of course, is the complete opposite. It's got tons of truck traffic. So we need to be thinking about getting the warehousing in the right positions, and then this high technology can probably spread out a little bit more.
I worked in the auto industry, and for a large manufacturing called Pico. They were bought out by Fiat in 2000.
Okay.
But I was 21 years a toolmaker later, and then 20 years or so I did cost estimating and have shops in the area that we gave work to, because we were the big dog in town at the time.
Sure.
All I know is when I was in the shop, I had to go. We had the Arlen's building on 8 Mile and Telegraph. Okay. And then the other side was our Pico building, where the machines were. I had to run across Telegraph Road, all the lanes.
Oh,
and a lot of people went out of their way to try to hit me. I'm kid you not. So it just happened. I knew the secretary over in Southfield, and they said, Ed, if you ever need anything, let me know. And I said, we need a traffic light, because there wasn't a traffic light between I should take that back, between 7 and 9 Mile Road, and they put one up. They were trying to get it through the county, and finally the city pushed enough, and we got it. So there's a danger all the time. Mm-hmm. Plus, if you ever went southbound on Van Dyke by the Sterling Assembly Plant, sure. And I have a friend that his wife's the manager there, at 2 o'clock when they leave, you can't get down Van Dyke, and the city of Sterling Heights won't put a traffic light in there. Because that's the first thing I said when I hit that traffic one time. I said, hey, why don't you put a traffic light in there? They said the city of Sterling Heights would not do that. So if you don't have control over the roads, you could have big problems. Just like if it's here on Van Dyke now gets jammed up more and more with I see. And it can be a problem with traffic, depending where the location of the building is, you know, and what time the people are leaving and things like that. If they're working 8 hours or 10 hours, our shops usually work 10 hours and 6 days a week. So we were always in those buildings. And we had 23 facilities in the Detroit area that the company had. So you got to know where that building's going and to be able to control that road and traffic, because otherwise it can become a nightmare. And you got to try that Van Dyke sometime around 2 o'clock going southbound, because it's terrible. It's absolutely terrible. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a really good series of points there. And yeah, we mentioned that we don't control the roads, so it's something to think about. If we were to get a very large facility that had that kind of major release of people or major arrival of people all at once, how would we handle that? And we would be dealing with the road commission, or Department of Roads, sorry. They changed the name a few years ago. And we probably want to be ahead of that. We probably want to put a bug in the road at the Department of Roads' ear, you know, early on, if we're going to make any more land available for industrial development that might be a large facility, so that they're thinking about it in advance along with us. And if we have things in our master plan that point to that, and we can say, look, right here in our master plan, it says, we are planning for the possibility of these large facilities that could potentially be disruptive to local traffic patterns. We have something to put on their desk when we approach them to negotiate for a traffic signal if we feel that one is needed. So yeah, excellent point. And it's something that we should be putting in our plan.
One of the things that I notice when I look at this thing is, as far as this Industry 4.0 goes, most everything is data-driven. You know, you look at things like self-driving cars and things like that, the development, the technology that goes into that. When you look at our industrial development line that goes right up M53, is there something we should be looking at in terms of developing the infrastructure in order to have fiber optic lines and things like that in that space already, so that people come in and say, hey, it's already built up for us?
Yes. In fact, we talked last time when we were talking about community facilities about broadband and the fact that it's not available in some of the township right now. And when you look at the areas where broadband is not available and the areas that we have zoned industrial, there is some overlap there. And it comes fairly close to Van Dyke. So that is something that we should be thinking about, because if we don't have the broadband available, the site selection committees for a lot of these companies will look elsewhere. Yes, so that's definitely something that we should be putting in our plan and thinking about, is how do we build out that broadband capacity, especially in those areas that could be attractive to industry.
Hello, behind you. Hi,
Oh, hey.
John Chaplin. You know, I was looking at your presentation. If you could go forward 2 slides to the 2005 Master Plan Industrial Developmental Goals there. You know, reading through that, this is a set of goals that were written 17 years ago. Are we there yet, even? I mean, we've got a strip designated for industrial. And 17 years ago, we said that we were going to have a well-planned industrial development area in the township that would be able to accommodate all these needs. We've got some legacy industry in there, and we've got some vacant fields. Yep. I think what did you said, 90-some% of that land that we've got designated industrial is still vacant. So when we're looking going forward at our master plan, I think what I would like to see some concentration on is looking at some milestones that we can build in that help us gauge our progress towards the goals in the master plan, not just stating a goal.
Sure.
And being, you know, happy that you know, future generations may or may not accomplish that goal for us. The other thing that I wanted to ask, because I'm a little, you know, I'm not understanding everything. We've got the designated industrial area, and this is just a question for anybody that might know. What do we consider industrial? Now, I understand that you've talked a lot about heavy industry versus tech-based industry, and I think that Gary made a great point. Infrastructure development for future tech-based industry is a huge thing as far as what we need to be looking towards. But I know a parcel recently sold in that area. It's where the old driving range was.
Sure, yeah.
And that's going to become a mini storage facility from what I understand, which to me would seem like a commercial venture rather than an industrial. But it's right in our industrial area. So I'm wondering how we, moving forward, based on a limited amount of 500 acres of industrial, ensure that we're preserving that for industrial uses versus commercial, and how do we make sure that that we're getting the right type of industries and the right type of business in the areas that we want them.
Sure, yeah, okay. There was a lot there, and there was some really good points. You're correct that to a degree we have not reached these goals yet. We're kind of at the point where we're probably going to start feeling more pressure to move in this direction because the development is going to come more rapidly. So we need to be thinking about how we modify these goals to both capture what they already say and plan for some of the changes that have occurred since they were originally established. The industrial development situated in park-like settings, which afford a more palatable transition with adjoining uses. I think when we look at that area that's across M53 that has that rec designation from 2018, that's a pretty good example of a parcel where that industrial park-like setting could be created. The area on the other side of M53 is mostly standalone sites arrayed in a row along M53. So we might think about some design standards, landscaping standards and things that gives that kind of a unified look, so that even though each site might be developed on its own, you would still feel when you drove down it, first of all, that it was a district or there was some thought put into how it developed, but also when you are on the other side of the street, which is not zoned for industrial development, that you're looking at something that is, you know, at least somewhat pleasing to the eye. And your point about commercial versus industrial and the self-storage that's been proposed is well taken. Because the thing is, if you have one self-storage facility come in, okay, that's fine. But if 5 more people see it and get it in their head that, okay, here's where I go to do self-storage, suddenly you've used a lot of your land on self-storage and you don't really have much left over for that actual economic development. So that in particular is a use we should be thinking about, but we should also be looking at the other list of uses, the list of other uses that's permitted in that district and seeing how we feel about each of those things in whatever industrial districts we come up with based on this plan. It's a very good point.
I would think that M53 Expressway would be much a better route for industrial than I mean, Van Dyke, like the gentleman had stated too, like it's terrible. I mean, there's more and more homes being built along Van Dyke too, just before a campground, and there's more traffic. And I would think that, but it'd be difficult to maybe designate some industrial east of M53 Expressway, since most of them are farmland. But do you think there might be some future expansions there?
Yes, the township's already given it some consideration. And we do have the Washington 10 gas compressor station over there as well. That's south of 30 mile? South of 30 mile, right? Yeah. So in that sense, it's already started to creep over a little bit. One thing to think about is how M53 interacts with the township alongside it, because we still have one intersection that is entirely roads going directly into M53. And the future of that intersection is probably very important to the future of industrial development in the township, because that's going to be a major access point, because it's right in the middle of where we have all this industrial zoning. And then if we go east of M53 at all, it's going to be even more in the middle of where we have all this industrial zoning. So how that interchange progresses in the future is very important. Now, up in Bruce Township, they made a new exit at 33 Mile, but the complaint I always hear is, well, the roundabout's too small for big trucks, and you got all this industrially zoned land off to the east. So the design of any future interchange is going to be very important. And also, ultimately, someday there will probably be a bridge there so that you can just go over and it will have an exit at it. That's the future of that area. So how that gets designed is going to be really, really important. And, you know, when the plan does finally come, it's going to be a big deal, and it's going to be really important to get it right and work with both the Department of Roads and MDOT to make sure that it gets done correctly.
I just want to tell you that 17 years ago, we were told there was going to be an entrance-exit ramp at 27 Mile Road, because we were looking at those condos.
Sure.
And it didn't happen.
Didn't happen.
So, you know, now you got a fire station that's got to go a couple miles out of the way, north or south, to get onto the expressway. So you better get, you know, things firmly in place with the county and the state to take care of this the right way and not make you promises that they don't keep after a while, and you've got industry coming in and they're, you know, blocking up neighborhoods and everything else. So I just want to let you know what we were told 17 years ago. 'Cause we
Sure.
were looking at those condos, but we didn't buy.
Right. Yeah, it's a good point. You know, plans get made and then nothing happens with them on a fairly regular basis when you're dealing with agencies, particularly state agencies that, you know, they're kind of doing everything from afar. One thing I will say is that the township owns some land within this pink boundary, and a portion of it, I don't know if it's actually been put aside or if we're just thinking about it, but a fire station is a potential thing over there in the future. One thing that, now that I'm talking about plans not getting followed through on, you brought up implementation. So one thing that when we develop master plans that we do is we have a whole implementation chapter at the end, and all of our goals are supported by strategies and action items that we literally have a grid that says, here's who's responsible for it, here's what we think the likely time frame is on it, and we can review that every year and kind of check off some things that we've made progress on. You won't always finish things. Very little is ever truly finished in municipal government. However, you can make progress on it, and we like to give you a method of tracking that progress. Another thing that we can do is some benchmarking. So we might have a goal that, you know, that actually we can tie some numbers to, and when we reach a certain number, then we've hit a certain benchmark, and it might trigger something else. Once we get into the actual drafting of it, those things will probably become apparent to us. But I do want to just let everybody know that that's kind of how we approach the last portion of a master plan. We really try to make it something that is action-oriented.
I'm going to go back to the 30 mile. You spoke of having an overpass, the future of an overpass possibly being there. Was that in consideration when the road was designed and when we had the setbacks for the dealerships? Because I did look at that intersection. I thought of an overpass going in at that point. And when I compared it to the other viaducts or overpasses, the lanes or the slope of angle would take you so far down 30 mile that did we miscalculate the planning of the dealerships on that side of the road? How are we going to correct it if there is a problem? And for the future of, say, the east side of 30 mile, we need to take that in consideration, and any other exits, ramps, or whatever. We need to look with the county, work with the county, so we don't run into a problem where, you know, we're allowing these buildings, industrial or commercial, whatever we have in these areas, that the roads won't accommodate where the position of the buildings are at. Sure. So I think we do need to focus on, or at least work hand in hand with the county to know what the development of the overpasses need to be to make sure we have a proper setback so everything fits in its area of where it needs to be. So it's just something that we might want to consider into the development stages of where we're going to allow development.
Yeah, it's a really good point because, yes, you do have constraints on the available right-of-way there now without taking any property. You do need a certain, because you're trying to keep your slopes below a certain percentage, so you do need a certain amount of length from that bridge, and the bridge has to have a certain amount of clearance. I think the absolute minimum is 14 feet, but I think bridges, they try to go higher. Mike, do you know what they try to go 16 feet or something like that? Yeah. 14 and a half. So you need to get up there pretty far just to have the clearance underneath. So there are definitely ways that you can handle it where, you know, if you wanted to do a complete rebuild, you could even lower M53 a little bit so you don't have to go as high up. However, I don't know if MDOT would be willing to do that. They probably want to keep the flow on M53 while they're building the bridge. But nevertheless, yeah, it's a major consideration. We don't want something getting built right next to the road where they're going to need to be putting more road in the future. Yeah, an exit ramp or whatever it might be, yeah.
I remember when M53 went through that one of the plans out there by Grand Home was to have a bridge over M53 there at 30 Mile Road. So there may be plans out there, and
There might
everything
be.
that we have may fall right into those plans. So maybe a little bit of research there can maybe reactivate those plans and see if we can just do some tweaking on it and maybe get the state to, because this isn't the county, it's, you know, this is the state now that we need to go over the bridge with.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, so as far as right-of-way goes of what was acquired when the freeway went in, it's very limited and tight. If you compare it to like what's at 28 Mile Road, which there obviously is an overpass there, but they, for whatever reason, bought a ton of right-of-way north and south at those corners, but at 30 and 31, it's very tight. We have had conversations with the county, or excuse me, with the state that started 4 years ago now, that we've tried to revisit, related to reconfiguring that intersection with both decel lanes as you're traveling northbound to turn to the right to go east onto 30 Mile Road, and then XL lanes coming off of 30 to start, and actually moving the turnaround further north so that it's not that crazy suicide turn that you have to make right now. And we've just kind of revisited that. I can tell you that from the state's perspective, there's nobody thinking about that project every day, or hasn't been for years. And when we brought it up to them more recently, they kind of said, oh, okay, what was the conversation back then? You know, whether it was different people that talked to, I don't know. But we're researching, because you guys did have a consultant do a study there, do some cost estimates that now you can double by 2, but that did look at that, and we're going to provide that to them and hopefully bring that back up, because it was in cooperation with both the state and the county, who was very interested, obviously, in improving the intersection to help drive development in that area. Absolutely, yeah, 100%. So it's not dead, but I wouldn't picture a bridge going over there anytime soon. It's going to probably be a little softer improvements at first.
Yeah, even softer improvements would be an improvement, because, yeah, I drive north on that pretty frequently, and someone's slowing down all of a sudden to take a right on 30 Mile. It's just like, whoa, what is happening, you know? It's really, and especially if you don't go through there very often, I can see it potentially being pretty startling to all of a sudden have brakes slamming on in front of you. And a lot of people don't slow down to 55 when they get to the sign that says 55. So it's a pretty dangerous area right now. So any improvements we could get there would obviously be desirable. But
when you think about 32 Mile Road and M53, that's all at-grade intersection.
Yep.
All 4 corners. Generally works. I mean, it's much better. So
Sure.
as that growth comes, you'll see those turns.
Yep.
You know, even if we can get the state to put up some caution flashing, even if we can get the state to put up some flashing caution signs through that 30-mile intersection to kind of slow people down and say, hey, guys, you know, that 107 miles per hour that you're going, it's just not cutting it, you know?
Right, yeah, the freeway really does end there for all intents and purposes.
Joe, one of the things that you mentioned was the land use, and I'm concerned because you mentioned this thing about the, and John mentioned it also, about the driving range now becoming a storage facility. Help me out here. We don't have anything that, there's a thing called property rights, which means, you know, somebody buys a property, they can do whatever they want with it. Auto parts stores being in the neighborhood, you know, kind of lends itself to everybody has on every corner we got an auto parts store. Is there something that we can do to try to limit the amount of particular uses for this land so all the industrial land doesn't get sucked up by commercial use?
It is partly a matter of how you handle your zoning. So, you know, self-storage is a permitted use, and it's a permitted use in that district. So you have a site plan for it. And, you know, we'll see if the site plan is compliant with our zoning ordinance. If it gets approved, it's obviously not approved yet. But that is something that we need to consider, is that a use that we want permitted in that district? Should it be permitted somewhere else? And that's part of the conversation that we'll be having, both during the master planning process and after the master planning process, when we start hitting the zoning ordinance to implement some of the ideas that we come up with. Bob needs a mic.
I still have somewhat of a courtroom voice. Let's say Mr. Bezos calls Supervisor Sam tomorrow. So I'm going to buy that hotel over there by 7 Lakes. I'm going to live in Washington. And I want to build one of my warehouse plants in Washington. As all of this stuff sits right now, what could Supervisor Sam tell him?
Well, I think he would be searching for the acreage.
Okay.
Those are massive, massive warehouses.
Oh, yeah.
So most likely, if something of that scale was going to come in, they'd be looking for a very, very large parcel. I don't think we have anything industrially zoned currently of that size. They would probably be looking at some kind of rezoning, most likely.
But it's more storage than it would be industrial, right? I don't know if
It kind of splits the difference. Warehousing and wholesaling like that does actually have a fair number of people involved in it still. And whereas a self-storage facility, there might be no one there, 16 hours a day,
So does it look like that'd be the quickest cup of coffee Sam ever had with a possible business coming here?
It may be. They may wind up seeing that, no, we'd have to assemble too much land, or we would have to do too much rezoning or something. We might go somewhere else. For something of that size, yeah, because those sites tend to take, they tend to take 100-acre sites. They're very, very large.
There, at least in the master plan right now, it still does show 32 Mile Road, which is,
Yes.
that there's that portion up there.
Yep.
That is not built on. There's a portion of it that's part of the Meyer PUD, but then there's the other section of land
Right.
there.
And then the zoning hasn't been extended down 32 Mile, but we do have it in the future land use map. So that would be a possibility. That's probably the largest contiguous area. You'd probably have to extend it south a little bit to accommodate something of that size. Yeah. There are, however, plenty of companies that do a lot of warehousing that aren't anywhere near on the scale of Amazon. And something like like a Patagonia or something needs warehousing facilities, and theirs would probably be of a size that we probably have, 10 or 12 parcels that they could possibly look at. So it's not just the huge ones. Sometimes there are some kind of medium to small ones that potentially could have a fit here.
With that being said, with the larger warehouses, I think that's one thing that also needs to be considered. Over at 23 Mile across from the fire department there, they have huge warehouses there, right?
Sure.
And during the pretty much all day and all night, you have semis lining up down the center lane to make it into the complex. They're backed up because they can't unload the stuff fast enough. Well, we could run into the same problem here if we start developing these large warehouses. I don't think our infrastructure of roads could handle the amount of flow of traffic that it generates. So, that's something that we may want to consider too is, I don't know how it'd be zoning, I guess we would tackle that, but we would have to just make sure that, we have a proper road structure to accommodate the warehouses without going too big, because I could see that happening where all of a sudden we've got semis backing up to make a right-hand turn into 30 Mile off the expressway. Now we're really in trouble.
Sure, yeah. Yep. Yeah, it's definitely a consideration, the scale of facilities. If we were to get something that big, it would be a problem right now. With the infrastructure that we do have, it would be a problem.
Well, I spoke to Jeff Bezos just a couple days ago, and he assures me there's nothing that we have to worry about immediately. But, he's right. I don't think any of our expressway infrastructure there and the current facilities would accommodate any type of heavy industry where there's a lot of trucking involved getting in and out of anywhere in that industrial area very easily. But what I was thinking along the lines of your earlier comment, if we look at that industrial strip north of 30 Mile Road, on the left-hand side of it, there's that red area, which is our commercial district. And that contains a multifamily overlay. So I'm suggesting perhaps as we go forward with this, we look at some of the areas to the east of our industrial area and consider doing some zoning over there where we might do some industrial overlays into those residential areas, so that if we do have the opportunity to bring in some industry, we're prepared to parcel off some larger lots in order to accommodate what we may get in the future. I did have a second question also. As this goes forward and you're designing this master plan, how deep into the budget and future cost analysis do we get on these projects? Obviously, we're going to be recommending some infrastructure changes and some developmental changes to the township. How deep do you guys get into the cost projections on that?
So typically in a master plan, you're thinking at a very high level, and there's very little of that kind of cost estimate work that goes into it. You can do some, certainly. But generally speaking, that comes along more in your capital improvement planning process. But if there are particular things where we might want to look at some potential cost in the future, just so that we're prepared, even if we're not going to think about it for 10 years, yeah, there could be some light analysis of that. Obviously, they'd be very general numbers because a lot changes in 10 years in terms of material costs and labor costs and things. But yeah, we could potentially think about some of that for very specific items. Let's see. I think we have touched on every discussion item. Yeah, there is a video from the Macomb County. It just talks about it's very promotional. It's not an unbiased look at Industry 4.0. However, it does give a little bit of background as to what Macomb Next is thinking, so we can bring that up. And I think I've got my volume muted, so. Let's see. I don't know what I have to do to get audio. It should come through the go-to meeting. Let's see what we got here. See if it comes up. Yeah, there's definitely audio here, so. Yeah. Oh, you know what? Maybe I have to stop my screen share and then reshare. So if I stop sharing this and then start sharing, oh, get out of there, start sharing this, maybe that will do it. Share screen.
Yeah, you can choose a screen.
Yeah, so if I do my browser, let's see. We get the infinite recursion of the go-to meeting. Let's see how it goes. Still not hearing anything. Okay. So I'm getting it off my computer, but, so let me see. Let's see if everybody can hear that, I guess.
Since the time of the earliest tools and the mastery of fire, technological progress has been an integral part of being human. By utilizing technology, we have surpassed the most efficient and capable life forms on our planet. But in a world of ever-increasing complexity and finite resources, we are now presented with a whole new set of challenges. How will the next industrial revolution change the way we live? And quite possibly, what it means to be human. Throughout history, there have been periods of remarkable innovation. The first industrial revolution created new goods and new jobs through the introduction of manufacturing. The power of water, iron, and steam helped bring manufacturing out of our homes and into a larger world. Cities and opportunities grew. In the second, we forged better materials such as steel, harnessed the power of oil through internal combustion engines, and utilized electricity through generators and transmission lines. We catalyzed manufacturing and expanded what was possible. After the digital revolution, we possess computers so small they can fit in our pockets, and they're 1,000,000 times cheaper and 1,000,000 times more powerful than the best supercomputer.
I don't know about 1,000,000.
Connecting through the internet has encouraged an incredible library of knowledge, setting the stage for the greatest revolution yet. So what is the fourth industrial revolution? Industry 4.0 involves a range of new technologies that are fusing the physical, digital, and biological worlds and impacting all disciplines, economies, and industries. Central to this revolution are emerging technology breakthroughs in areas such as robotics, artificial intelligence, the Internet of Things, autonomous vehicles, nanotechnology, and 3D printing. These technologies can improve lives, create new jobs, make goods cheaper and better, and impact the world in ways we have yet to imagine. While it's remarkable to see the current trends, it's important to remember that technological progress is not simply guaranteed. It requires people to make it happen. This is your opportunity to get involved. This revolution does not happen without your help. Now is the time to be imagining. Now is the time to be creating. Now is the time to be a manufacturer.
So as I said, very promotional in content, but nevertheless, it gives you a sense of what the state of Michigan and Macomb County are thinking when they promote this idea of Industry 4.0 as part of the future of economic development. We really are moving into an era, I mean, we're already in an era of just change at blinding speed. Things have just changed so incredibly rapidly today. I think to a degree, we've almost outpaced our own capacity for embracing change. I mean, if something hasn't passed you by, you're kind of unusual. I mean, even the youngest people, I think, kind of get outpaced by some of the innovations that are happening now. And it's only increasing in speed. So, you know, this master plan will be our attempt to get as far ahead of it as we possibly can. And we will follow up with zoning language and work on the map that positions us as well as we possibly can for the future. And as things continue to change, we'll continue to revisit it and make sure that we're keeping ourselves as close to on pace with change as possible. But this conversation is really the beginning of that. So, thank you for your input and your questions. And I think a lot of really great points were made. And if anybody has anything else, just let's pass the mic.
You're not going to do
Last question I have, I promise I'll sit on my hands after this question.
It's okay.
Some will get that. Yeah, no, actually, I just want to go back, because Dana, did you say that everything was kind of put in as one industrial area where we used to have light industrial, then heavy industrial, right?
Yeah, we used to have light industrial, heavy industrial, then special industrial, but special industrial was specific to the 26-mile road TRW ZF sites. Because it was the first of its kind.
Okay.
Based on the, how large that facility was at the time and all the different components that were involved with that. But we did have light industrial, and then we did have heavy, and the heavy was more the truck traffic, and it was positioned more, towards those areas that would get the trucks off our local roads.
So is it classified as industrial? Is it, or do we still have it divided into light industrial? Okay. And I think that's something we need to look at as the master plan, because I think if we keep it into the light industrial, we can control the expansion of big warehouses, right? And when the master plan was developed, how many years ago it was, I don't think any of us in this room could look and say, oh yeah, a warehouse as big as we see it now. The only buildings you ever seen that big was industrial. The manufacturing, the GM's assembly plants is the only thing I can think of that would compare to the size of what I look at today. So when they did the master plan, they had no idea. They had no foresight to imagine something that size going into areas, right? So I think if we take the master plan and keep it onto the light industrial side of it, we can control some of that to eliminate the possibilities of having these giant warehouses put into our area, which from there it's just going to be a snowball effect because our infrastructure and everything else that has to go along with it to supply it. So maybe that's something we really need to do, is have it designated as a light industrial, and then that way we can probably have a better master plan and better foresight in keeping it more of what maybe the community wants to see.
Especially with the extension of utilities now, we
Yep.
really need to take a look at those areas.
Mm-hmm.
Real quick, I don't need the mic. Richie, same question to you that I posed to Joe. If Sammy got the call tomorrow from Bezos, where would you sit water and sewer, et cetera? Would we equip something like Bezos or light industrial like Benny says?
30-mile road and Van Dyke that we're working on right now. I don't see any other place.
Okay.
That's more of a parcel size
Right.
issue than it is.
Yeah. He's going to be living on the moon in 10 years anyway, so. Him and Elon will be up there. Yes, we'll definitely have some sort of height restriction. And that's, that'll be something that might vary from one industrial district to another. In fact, if you're interested, I could tell you what our height limit in industrial is right now, because I have the zoning ordinance open. At the moment, our industrial district has a height limit of 40 feet right now, which is actually fairly low for modern industrial. 50 is probably more the norm now, or at least that's the way things are moving. And the 50 feet is largely to accommodate cranes that are interior to a building. You have a track, and this is in warehouses and in manufacturing facilities. You have these kind of ceiling cranes that run in a track up on the ceiling, and without that 50 feet, they're too low to give all the clearance that they need. So a lot of industrial facilities are going up to 50 feet to accommodate that kind of system inside their facility. So you may wind up with one district that has 50 feet and another that has 40. Yes, yeah.
You should have it in writing because this is a little different
No, sure. Yep.
So that's important, the height restriction, because you don't know what's coming in here. Somebody may want a 5-story warehouse. You know, you're blocking some views, maybe, depending where your subdivisions are into those areas also. It's important to know the height.
Sure. Yeah, and that's where setbacks become important too, because if we have a 50-foot rear yard setback, you may have industrial behind it, or residential behind an industrial property. And if you have a 50-foot tall building that's set back 50 feet, suddenly you're probably starting to look at light and air issues. So you might want to increase setback in that situation. Yeah. Oh, yeah, the airport in Ray, too. There's going to be some height restrictions in that area as well.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but right now, currently our zoning is 3 stories. And that's what we approved the senior citizen development over on 26 Mile for, was 3 stories.
Yeah, in that district, you can do 3 stories. In industrial, it's 2 stories and 40 feet. Yes, yep. You had to have certain angles on the buildings. There are still zoning ordinances that have that, in particularly shorefront communities.
You know, I guess I had one more comment, if I could. When I look at, it's just about the I guess the type of master plan this is going to be. Because obviously we look at the one from 2005 and people set down a lot of well-meant goals, and a few things were implemented, some of it wasn't, and it just kind of sat there for a lot of years and was a good idea on paper. And I'm wondering more as to how we're going to move forward with the new master plan, in particular implementation. You know, are we going to, instead of the way that they did it in the past, you know, the next step would be sort of a, you know, since they just played the game, of Field of Dreams approach. If we build it, they will come. You know, are we going to invest in developing, you know, industrial centers and the other parts of the master plan that we've talked about, hoping that we're going to get industry move into the area, or are we going to take a more proactive approach and go out and actually court these industries to bring them into the township? Obviously, everybody wants industrial. I think that understands what benefits it brings to the township. So as a general comment, that's what I'm wondering about is moving forward, how we're going to implement this master plan.
Yeah, it's a good question, and ultimately it is a matter of policy. From the Planning Commission's standpoint, I think we can plan on annual master plan review. Because if you say, like every July, we're going to look at our master plan, or depending on when this gets adopted, it's probably going to be sometime in the spring. You could look at, say, let's say it gets adopted in April. You could look at it every April, having an agenda item that is master plan review. And that kind of forces everybody to look at the plan and say, well, what are we doing to move ourselves toward these goals? And sometimes that's enough to remind everybody, oh yeah, we have some policy that we need to establish here. And I think that if you're going to do annual master plan review, the best thing that you can do is have a deliverable for the Planning Commission to produce. So they don't just sit around and talk about it. They actually send a report to the township board that says, we did our annual master plan review, and here's what we found. We found that, you know, these goals are all still relevant. We wanted to think about this, and, you know, we need a policy for this. And that can keep the township moving forward on its master plan goals in a proactive way. And most communities don't do that. They adopt a master plan, and then 5 years go by and they're like, whoa, it's been 5 years since we did our last master plan. Are we going to do another one? And I think that's probably 99% of all communities. But we can choose to be different, and we can do that proactive annual review and report to the township board, and the board can set whatever policies it feels it needs to set to move those goals forward.
With all that's been said, that's kind of a double-edged sword, right? We don't want development, we don't want new homes, we don't want industrial, we don't want commercial, we don't want the traffic, we don't want this, we don't want that. But then let's plan for the industrial and let's get the infrastructure in there and let's go out and court them. So that's the fine line we all walk, right? And the one thing that the master plan has always been intended, in my mind, is to look to the future. What we're going to do, where we're going to do it, basically, and how we're going to do it. A lot of things happened between 2005 and then 2018 with the review. As far as the economy taking a nosedive, people pulling their monies back and saying, we're not going to invest. Those are things you cannot predict. Those are things you cannot control. So you just do the best and you can. You keep moving forward on the master plan. It's an ever-changing model. It's a living document, right, Joe?
Yep,
It's a living document. And as with any living document, you always update, review, plan, update, review, plan. And it's a continuous cycle. And that's all I have. Thank you, Joe.
Mm-hmm. Sam?
When's the next meeting? September.
The next meeting is, hang on. September 19th.
Hi, I actually missed the last one, so I watched the video last night, and I had quite a few questions in regards to the last topic. So would it be appropriate to ask them now or to email the board to have that in writing this week?
I mean, we can certainly address some of them here. It's a matter of whether you want to ask them now or after, you know, in a side conversation. That's up to you.
I had quite a few, so just looking through points of, and this was in reference to the July meeting, it's talking about water capital along 31 Mile Road, and there was reference a couple times in the meeting about the northwest quadrant of the township in regards to water and sewer. So what do you speak of when we're talking about the northwest quadrant? What areas are we talking about?
Mike, I don't know if you want to.
So is that part of the plan to bring water and sewer to those residential areas out there?
Sewer will not cross Mound anywhere north of 26.5. Water will eventually, it's master plan for all major section line roads.
So how would that affect people who want wells and want to keep wells? I know it was talked about in that meeting that, oh, people will be able to keep wells, but how does that work?
Yeah, the board approved, as a part of the 31 Mile Road project, the board approved specifically for that project, but the easements that would be signed, but for any future projects as well, that anyone along a major section line road where a new water main is installed that already has an existing well will be able to keep their well. If their well fails, they can drill a new well, provided they can get a permit from the health department, because they're the governing agency over that, but they would not be forced to connect to that public water main.
But that would affect their land and trees and all of that.
What would, I'm sorry?
If you're putting in sewer lines, so those
So
wells,
careful with water and sewer,
well,
two different things.
right, but if you're doing anything to that area underground, you obviously are
It's not on the
changing
screen.
the look of that area, is that correct?
The construction of a water main will have the impact of removing trees in the route only of the water main, yes.
There was reference to solar energy, and they showed a picture of, an example of solar panels along a farm. Do we have a plan to bring a solar farm to this area?
No, there's no plan to bring a solar farm to the area. There are site selection commissions for companies that do solar farms. The thing is that they're looking for concentrations of land that are in excess of 200 acres. And there's really no concentration of land in this township in excess of 200 acres that would serve their needs. So they're primarily looking north and east of Washington Township.
Okay. Just because the farms that I'm aware of, throughout Michigan, they're quite an eyesore, and they don't really, I mean, the benefit of the energy they bring is not what, it doesn't benefit what you have to use the land for to put all those panels up. The only other comment, I know there was quite a bit of discussion about water and how we need more water in these areas for firefighters, and I listened to the fire chief speak and things like that, but it seems to me that a couple of our board members were using scare tactics and saying things like, we could lose a firefighter if we don't bring water and sewer to our, entire township. To me, that's kind of like scare tactics that were used with COVID, that we use fear to make decisions instead of maybe sound, thought out, and what the residents want. Pretty much you ask anybody who moved here, they moved here to get away from a Shelby or a Macomb Township. So I hope our board remembers that when you're making these decisions, because we didn't move here to look like what is to the south of us. Most of us moved here to get away from that, and if you ask residents and talk to them, it's very clear that that's what we want. And hopefully our board will do the will of the people, since that's what they're elected to do. Thank you.
Gravel industry. We've got the gravel pits that are sitting over there on the west side of the township. What's the future of that industry over there? I don't know what the leases are and how long that's going on, but
There's only 2 active sites currently. The one is the Messina site, site number 16, located on the west side of Mound, just south of 31, north of Inwood. And then a Messina site on the north side of 31 Mile Road, east of Greystone. Those are the only 2 that have active permits right now and that are being mined. The reclamation plan for the Mound Road site is to fill that site back to grade and farm it. And the reclamation plan for the 31 Mile Road site is to be residential, very much like Hidden Oaks. What is it right there? Hidden Oaks, that's right next door. Same type of road goes in, road comes out. Large single-family parcels, no sanitary sewer there, but there is water, or there will be water along 31.
so there's no plans to issue any future permits?
There's no applications pending for any future permits.
That's a good technical.
Okay, we're talking over 31 west of Mound Road. Back in 76, 77, there was a dump over there. Is there any plans on developing that, building on that? People know it still was a dump site there. Good.
There's 2 landfills on the west side of Mound at 31. One is maintained by the Macomb County Southern Macomb SMDA, Southern Macomb Disposal Authority. That has a leachate system. They do regular testing. I would say that's a maintained dump facility. And then there was property where there was illegal dumping north of Inwood, west of 31 Mile Road on approximately 40, 50 acres that are in the back there. That is not maintained. There's a large amount of solid waste that is just sitting in the ground right now. There are Eagle orders to that property owner to clean that site up, and the township has been very aggressive to attempt to help enforce those, but it falls to the state for that maintenance. Oh, and then there's the Walker landfill on the north side of 31 Mile Road, south of Seven Lakes, that is also maybe in between those first 2 that I described. How's that?
Okay, then with that, I thank you guys all for attending tonight. If you have any questions, feel free to email myself or any of the board members or planning and zoning department, and we'll address them. And we'll also put another survey out, keep checking our website, and take the online survey. So, thank you all. Have a good night.
Any updates on the water main, or?
Yeah, so we're still working on that. We have another meeting at 8:30 with the Macomb Emergency, and it's still looking like it's going to be at least 2 weeks. They got the pipe in from Texas. They arrived today, I think, and so it's going to take about a week to install and about a week to disinfect the water. So minimum 2 weeks. We're thinking it'll be a little longer because they got to run tests with the water and stuff, but hopefully things will move faster. And we're working with the county and state to get water. So as soon as water comes in, we'll be sending Nexel reports, check our websites daily, and also WBRW has been informing the public, and we'll be doing water giveaways as we receive water. And the township's looking into purchasing water as well to help facilitate and give out water faster than we're receiving it. So we're just playing it by day by day, and we're doing, now we're going down to morning meetings with GLWA and getting updates every day, but over the weekend we were probably every 2 hours on the phone with them and Zoom calls. So it's developed a lot over the last 24 hours. There's been a lot of confusion over the boil alert. We're still on it, so I know southern communities have gotten off of it. We need to stay on it. We've been very grateful. A lot of the residents have stopped outside irrigation. That's helping to keep our water flow. And then our connection with Shelby is helping to maintain some water pressure. But we need the help of all the residents to please conserve water as much as possible and limit the outside irrigation. So I don't know. Okay, thank you. So thank you all. Have a good night.